Bangladesh, a nation forged in the fires of revolution, found itself teetering on the precipice once more. At the heart of the unrest was a deep-seated resentment towards a system perceived as inherently unfair. The controversial quota system, a relic of the past, reserved a significant portion of government jobs for the families of veterans who fought in the 1971 War of Independence. While intended to honor their sacrifice, it had morphed into a symbol of privilege and inequality. For years, a simmering discontent had brewed among the youth, particularly university students, who felt the system robbed them of opportunity. They argued that merit, not lineage, should determine their future. The quota system, they believed, was a blatant attempt to reward loyalty over competence, perpetuating a cycle of nepotism and corruption. The government, led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, remained unmoved by their pleas for reform, dismissing their concerns as unfounded and their actions as futile. The government's intransigence proved to be a fatal miscalculation. It ignored the deep well of frustration that had been building for years. What began as murmurs of dissent soon transformed into a chorus of outrage as students from across the nation united in their opposition to the quota system. Their demands were clear: dismantle this antiquated system and create a level playing field where opportunities were based on merit, not bloodlines. From whispers to roars, the students rise up. The student protests began peacefully, with rallies and demonstrations held in university campuses across Bangladesh. They organized marches, gave fiery speeches, and used social media to amplify their message, calling for a fairer and more equitable society. Their movement, fueled by a potent mix of idealism and anger, quickly gained momentum, attracting support from various quarters of society: teachers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens who shared their frustrations. However, the government, instead of addressing the legitimate concerns of the students, chose to respond with force. Police were deployed to disperse the protesters using tear gas, water cannons, and batons to quell the unrest. Journalists covering the protests were harassed, detained, and even physically assaulted in an attempt to stifle dissent and control the narrative. The government's heavy-handed tactics, rather than quelling the protests, only served to further inflame them. Images of police brutality against unarmed students were widely circulated on social media, sparking outrage and galvanizing support for the protesters. What began as a student-led movement had now transformed into a nationwide uprising, uniting people from all walks of life against a government perceived as increasingly authoritarian and out of touch. A nation on fire violence engulfs Bangladesh. The situation escalated dramatically on July 16, 2024, marking a tragic turning point in the protests. What began as a peaceful demonstration in Dhaka descended into chaos when clashes erupted between students and law enforcement. The air, thick with tear gas and the sound of stun grenades, became a battleground as protesters, armed with stones and sticks, fought back against the police. The violence, once unleashed, spread like wildfire throughout the nation. Universities became fortresses, barricaded by students determined to stand their ground. Government buildings were set ablaze, symbols of a system deemed corrupt and unresponsive. The death toll mounted with each passing day as the unrest spiraled further out of control. Amidst the chaos, reports emerged of pro-government student groups, allegedly backed by the ruling Awami League, attacking protesters and journalists. These groups, armed with machetes and iron rods, roamed the streets with impunity, instilling fear and further fueling the cycle of violence. The government, however, denied any involvement in these attacks, blaming the opposition for instigating the violence and attempting to destabilize the nation. In the midst of escalating tensions, voices from all corners began to call for peace and restraint. Leaders, both local and international, urged for dialogue over conflict. The hope was to find a path forward without further bloodshed, but, well, the situation was already teetering on the edge. As the situation grew increasingly dire, the military stepped in. Their intervention marked a significant turning point, aiming to restore order but also inevitably intensifying the conflict. The streets, once filled with the cries for freedom, now echoed with the footsteps of soldiers. It was a moment of profound uncertainty and fear. Bangladesh now stood at a crossroads. The choices made in these critical moments would shape the nation's future for generations to come. Would the path forward be one of reconciliation and rebuilding, or would it spiral further into chaos? The world watched, holding its breath, as the fate of a nation hung in the balance.